Oh, shit.
All right, welcome on into the Falls Count Anywhere podcast. Charlie Turner, Chris DiCarlo, John Rustino, all here with you as usual, hanging out here with you guys, and thank you for checking us out. Guys, we're rolling up on October already, and we're already rolling up on 2 years doing this show. So, we're going to have to plan something special for our 2-year anniversary. I think that's the end of next month. I think more towards the end of October, if I remember correct.
Yes.
It's been a fuzzy 2 years. I don't know.
Yes, and I'm working on it.
All right, get to work on that, brother. We'll have something planned. I don't know, maybe not. We'll see what happens. But just thought it was kind of cool. It's already 2 years coming up. But guys, as we've been rolling along on this show, we've talked to some great guests along the way. We've even had some guests that have kind of stuck with us, and now we just can't get rid of some of these guys, and it's great because we love the wrestling history and the stories and all the great stuff that comes along with it. So, Chris, go ahead and introduce our guests for today, our returning guests, and our newest guest for today as well.
Yes, well, we have a special show here today. We're going to chime in our friend and friend of the show, wrestling historian of all the territories from Minnesota, Mr. George Shire.
Hey, guys, it is good to be back, even if I am returning and you're trying to get rid of me.
Never, George, never. We love having you, man.
No, it's fun. Thanks.
And also a special guest today we tried to get before, president of a group that was started years ago that we're trying to get going and promote heavily. He is from the Wrestling Fans International Association, President, Mr. Brad Drake.
Good evening, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, Brad, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to have you, Brad. We got some fun stuff to talk about.
George, it's good to see you. How's the weather up there in Minnesota?
Hey, I'm in my summer shirt on September 20th in Minnesota. It's 83 degrees. That's unheard of.
Wow.
We just wait for the first snowflake to fall anytime after this. So.
That's right. We can relate to that.
8 months of winter, if anybody cares to feel sorry for me.
Now, here in the Buffalo area, we do not.
Yeah.
Well, misery loves company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, George and Mr. Drake, let's tell our fans and viewers out there all about the WFIA and how people can sign up through all their media platforms and build a great future here with classic wrestling.
I can get started on this one, George, if you want.
Absolutely.
The WFIA is back, and anybody that's been a long-term wrestling fan, and by long-term, I mean beyond 2000. Sometimes I say old school wrestling and kids think it's 2002 that I'm talking about, but it's not. So the WFIA was a long-standing fan organization, and just what a tremendous history to it and what they accomplished during the kayfabe era. And George was actually an original member, and he can fill us in on some of the history here in a few moments. But I brought the organization back in March after listening to several podcasts, weekly podcasts. I heard people like Bruce Pritchard and Jim Cornette and several others talk about the WFIA back in the 1970s. And I actually tried looking it up to see if it still existed to join myself. And when I saw that there really wasn't anything on it, and frankly, there's not a whole lot out there about the history except for some videos that Supermouth Dave Drayson has posted on YouTube, I did a check to see if the trademark if it was registered to somebody. That'd be a way to find out if the organization was still valid. And I found that the trademark had expired. So I thought with the great history of this organization and what it stood for, definitely has a place in modern day. And so I registered the trademark, and we launched a Facebook group in March, and we got ourselves really organized with a board of directors, a website, and we're the real deal. And just recently, George, who's been a special advisor to us since our reincarnation, I should say, George actually accepted the position as being a board member with us. So
Awesome.
this is not just an organization that's just on Facebook and we like to chat, right? We're actually having monthly or every 6-week board meetings. We have plans for a convention that we'll talk about further down the road, but looking at next September for a convention. And we are a group on the move. We mean business, and we're trying to bring back the pride and history and dignity of the WFIA and bring it to the modern wrestling fan, along with having all the old school fans like us a part of it.
Awesome. Well, I mean, first, sorry to interrupt you, George, for a minute, but I heard of you through another friend of the show and friend of ours, podcast Classic Family, as Mr. Brian Ferguson with the Bumps and Thumps podcast. I've known about that for a little bit. And okay, take it away, George.
Well, I was going to say, when you touch on the WFIA, and Brad started to tell us a little bit about the original history, this was an organization that a lot of modern day fans wouldn't even be able to put a grasp onto it or understand it, because back in 1968, and for some that seems like a lifetime ago, but our internet in professional wrestling was through fan clubs. And I'm talking fan clubs for individual wrestlers. And you'd be surprised to know that it seemed like any major wrestling star of that era, somewhere along the line, they had a fan club. And what these fan clubs did was they would highlight the wrestler's career, the individual that they had a club for. They would share match results of the wrestler wherever he was and appeared. They would provide photos for the members that would join. And in those days, guys, you could join a fan club for $1 or $1.50, or sometimes it would be, $5 annual dues or something. But it was relatively cheap when you think back in 1968 dollars. And you'd get a regular monthly or bi-monthly, some were semi-annually bulletins. But this information became kind of a Bible for a lot of the fans, because I remember one club that was so good for Edward Carpentier, the Flying Frenchman. And it was done by a lady, Rosie McCumber, out of Denver, Colorado. And she started the club for him. And man, her bulletins were so informative. And we're talking the old staple at the top, runoff, and again, by today's standards, Neanderthal type printing.
You're right.
But it was state of the art for the time. And so many wrestlers, Mad Dog Vachon and Nick Bockwinkel and Ramon Torres. I remember doing that club. That was mine. But Dr. X and Ray Stevens and so many. And it wasn't only wrestler bulletins. It was also results bulletins. It was territory bulletins that would come out. One of the greatest ones, and I'll tell you, it stands up today like none of them does. And that was Wrestling Information Bulletin that was put out by the late Ron Dobratz. You talk about something with staples, regular magazine type, and very nicely printed, again, for that era. And informative, oh my goodness. And then we had Matt Mania, which was originally a bulletin that just covered the territories. All of these clubs could get together, and then Don Wilson out of St. Louis, Missouri, who had been a longtime wrestling fan. He was a promoter off and on with different organizations. And Don decided, wouldn't it be fun if we could bring all of these fan clubs, give them the opportunity to be together in a specific town or territory and have an annual, what they called in those days, conventions. So believe it or not, I just was thinking of some of the cities here as I was talking. They would hold an annual reunion convention, and Don would go in and work with the various promoter in that city or territory. And we'd get a hotel. Guests could come from all over. You'd get special rates on the hotels, etc. And then we'd have a big meeting room. There'd be a banquet. And whatever territory we were in, we would give out annual awards. So, for example, if we were in Houston, well, naturally, we'd be working with Paul Bosch, and we did. And we'd have the wrestlers. Paul would provide wrestlers to come through with us and talk with us. Now, I will point out, these wrestlers stayed in character. They didn't break kayfabe. I mean, we weren't in that place. But they would talk with the fans. They would sign autographs. And they'd be at the banquet with us. And then we'd give away a wrestler of the year, a tag team of the year. And they were just little plaques, but and then we'd vote on the fan club of the year, and which fan came the longest distance to be there, they'd get an award. And it was so much fun.
That's cool. Yeah.
And the bottom line, guys, is that the most important thing that came out of this is the friendships that were forged, because all of us came from different cities, towns, states, and we got to be good friends. And when I think of some of the people that, and I'll tell you this, we've lost a lot of people. I mean, they've aged, they've passed on. But when I just think of guys like Dave Brzezinski, Supermouth Dave Drayson, which is what he likes to be known as, and Tom Burke, and obviously Don Wilson, and Mike Tenay. Everybody know Mike Tenay?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
He's a great wrestling announcer and just one of the greatest guys. He was one of the original members with his LA Wrestling Bulletin. And Mike Lano and the late Jim Melby. And, of course, me and others and Diane Devine. I mean, the list just goes on. And we forged these long friendships. But you look at the cities we went to. Mankato, Minnesota, got all the AWA talent to show up. We had St. Louis, Missouri. We got to work with Sam Muchnick in his office and provide a card for us. And that's the other thing. There would always be a wrestling card that was in conjunction to this. And they would acknowledge the WFIA in attendance that night.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Indianapolis, great. And, how fun was it when we were in Indianapolis and I got to go visit Bobby Heenan's house that he was living in at the time?
Yes.
Fun stuff. And then places like Boston, Kansas City, Knoxville, Atlanta, Miami, Dallas, Houston. I mean, every year it was a different place. And what was really unique about it is because, again, with no internet or any real way for the average fan that just watched wrestling and watched it on one of their 4 channels in their city, we didn't know what happened in these other cities unless we grabbed the newsstand magazine that had a feature story or something on some wrestler you hadn't heard of. So when you come together with these reunions and you visit with these other fans, it was spectacular. It was so much fun. It'd usually be 2 or 3 days that we would do this. And again, the friendships. So when Brad came up with the idea to resurrect this, obviously it's in a little bit different form because we all know that, kayfabe is gone. We know that if something happens right now, it's on the internet right now.
Yep.
Or if it hasn't happened yet, they're telling you on the internet. People can Google anything. But the bottom line is this. We still have a lot of people that just enjoy getting together and want to talk wrestling and share stories about their day, especially some of us older folks that are still here. But the good thing about the WFIA that Brad is talking about, and I hope I'm not out of turn on this, Brad, but the main thing is that we're trying to bring the newer generation, the new fans, and come together because the bottom line is we have one thing in common. We love wrestling. Now, I'll admit I'm not a fan of today's product, but I respect all the fans that watch it and enjoy it and have their time. And I enjoy talking with them and get excited for them about what they're sharing. And if they want to learn about history, I'm obviously willing to share it with them. So this is what it's all about. And then, Brad, if I left anything out there, continue on and tell us a little bit more.
I think you've nailed some real great points, George. And, the resurrected WFIA also has a bi-monthly publication called Wrestling Fan News,
Yep.
which the original WFIA had. And we have worked very hard to make that resemble a 1970s or 1980s wrestling magazine that you would pick up off the stand. And I'm pretty proud of the work we've done so far. We have a new issue coming out here on October 1st, and all of our issues are free to our members, and our members you can become a member for free. You can head on over to thewfia.org. That's THEWFIA.org. You can sign up today. It's 100% free. Gets you a free digital subscription to Wrestling Fan News. And we also have a very active Facebook group. And you can find us for that on facebook.com/groups/WFIA 1969.
Nice.
Hey guys, this is great information, and I just gotta throw it out here because all these conventions happen in, like, for us, it's like 12-hour drive away. This can, if you guys want to consider Buffalo, I'm just gonna throw it out there. Niagara Falls, Buffalo, Western New York. We got some good wrestling history here. Elio DiPaolo's restaurant, as far as banquets go. Just a food for thought there, if you will, if you're thinking about locations, because we'd love to see you guys in person and without making a 15-hour trip, but whatever. If that's the case one day, that's the case. But we want to consider Buffalo, man. We're going to vouch for that all the way.
Buffalo's a fantastic town.
Good wings here too, guys. So we got plenty of wings.
So some of my favorite wrestlers came out of the Buffalo territory. You mentioned Elio DiPaolo.
Yep.
And of course, Dick Beyer, the Destroyer, and Billy Red Lyons.
Absolutely.
So many guys that old time fans would remember. Fritz von Erich wrestled up there a lot. And
well, listen, we got two board members here on the show. I'm trying to put a buzz in your ear here, so don't forget us, man. Don't forget about Western New York.
Well,
my big ears are open.
Sounds like fun, though. Kind of reminds me, well, I haven't been yet, to Waterloo, Iowa, that I promote each and every year, that hopefully I'll get to one year. But it kind of sounds like that in a way, and that's a good thing.
Let me just say that, after the WFIA, the original one, went on hard times and faded away, the Cauliflower Alley Club, when they opened up their annual reunions to the public, which they didn't do until the year 1999 was the first one. And that was you mentioned Waterloo, but originally the Iowa Museum was in Newton, Iowa. And the first year it opened up was 1999, and the CAC held their annual reunion there that year. And for the grand opening of the museum. And that was the first year that fans were able to come. Before that, the CAC was just a West Coast meeting each year of the old wrestlers that would get together at what they called the Old Spaghetti Factory out in, I guess it's Los Angeles. And they would get together and tell their old war stories and, old friends meeting and talking. And that's what it was. And it was closed to fans. The interesting thing about it, though, is that the CAC allowed wrestling writers, journalists, photographers, announcers, referees, all of those people to become members, but you never got to go to the actual reunion that they were holding before 1999. I was a member I've been a member of CAC since 1982. And every year I would just get the bulletin and hear all these great stories from these old wrestlers. And it was $25 a year. I just popped $25 in the mail back then. Back when you had to put it in the mail, Mm-hmm. And finally in 1999, and it was open to the fans, I thought, $25 a year. And they had a lifetime membership offer of $300. Pay $300 to become a lifetime member. Well, being in a bank all my life, I figured, let me do a little quick math here. If I give them $300, I'm gonna roll the dice and say I can live 12 more years for the $25 a year. So I think I beat those odds, and I'm a member all these years.
Paying for itself now, yeah.
But the thing about the CAC was, in many ways, what it became, as now it's a fan organization. It very much started to resemble what WFIA was back in the day. The only difference being is that there were no fan clubs or anything anymore, because sadly, all the fan clubs, as time evolved and, the technology that we have today, it's not, nobody's going to do a fan club anymore. I mean, it just doesn't work.
Too much internet going on. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, but that's really what it was. And then you mentioned Waterloo now. When you go to these reunions at the Halls of Fame, they probably resemble it too, because you have the wrestlers there. major difference today is the wrestlers are out of character and they're out of kayfabe. They'll talk with you, about anything, and that's fun, but it's also sad. I mean, I'll admit I liked it when it was, let us guess a little bit.
Absolutely.
Is there really a Santa Claus? It's more
Right.
and I used
don't tell me, George. Don't tell me.
It's funny that I just brought that up that way, because I always said that when we talk about, is wrestling real? Is it fake? Is it something else? Which is something I talk about in my Minnesota wrestling book. Notice how I got that cheap plug in there. But Nick Kozak, the wrestler out of Houston, Texas, he always said when a fan would ask him, is wrestling fake, or that stuff's fake, right? And the wrestlers hated that so much because, they put their bodies through hell.
Yeah.
And Nick would just answer them, his answer was, for those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who don't believe, no answer will do. And you just leave it at that. And I added my own little touch to that scenario. And I said, wrestling was a lot like Santa Claus. It's more fun when you believe.
Absolutely.
And if you think about a young child, before 6 or 7, and probably earlier today with the way things are, but when you look at a little child, when they believe in Santa Claus and the joy and the fun and the smiles and the happiness that is part of Christmas for them, yeah, there's really a Santa Claus. There is. And that's what wrestling was back in the day. It was more fun when you believed a little bit. Anyway, so there you go.
Kind of do.
Great stuff, guys. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, guys, stay with us. We're going to do some of our normal show with you here. And George knows it already, but Mr. Drake, you're in for a treat. John, let's roll our first clip.
I think it's the play button there, John. Yeah.
Ooh, a wise guy.
Hold on.
How
That's
got
great.
I'm trying to get unmuted over here. I don't know what's happening. All right. You know what? Enough.
I got to give him a hard time. It's mandatory now.
Here we go.
Here we go.
I'm glad I didn't guess. I wouldn't have guessed that. 226 pounds from Florida, Hacksaw Sawyer. Now, ladies and gentlemen,
Again, another referee from that era who just found a striped shirt and said, "Yeah, just wear that. You're gonna be the referee tonight." I think he got that at the county seat.
Flea market.
Some of the wrestlers, too. Look at that guy.
solid 225, Bob. I tell you, he's solid 225. If he's anything like his brother, I tell you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to introduce Mr. Brett Sawyer. Brett, thanks for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it was happy to be on your show for sure. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Now, was he audio only on Bumps and Dumps there, Chris? Do we know?
Yeah, he was audio only, which he would have been on ours too.
Gotcha.
He could be audio only if he wants.
Well,
Yeah.
he passed away, guys, shockingly, and that's
Oh.
Oh, didn't know
that's
that.
why I did this video. I'm kind of glad it's first, so we kind of talk about him. The late, shockingly, Brett Wayne Sawyer, younger brother of Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, who worked all the territories. I just got to know Brett. Actually, we were talking over the phone. That's how kind of close we were. And I was trying to, introduce him to David Crockett and tried to put his name out there. And he did go to the gathering in Charlotte a couple months ago. But shockingly, I saw that he passed away, and I kind of still can't believe it. But what a talent. And obviously we've seen footage there. He was mainly in the Portland territory, and then he was in Georgia Championship. But it's sad that we lost Brett Wayne Sawyer recently.
One of the things that's about Brett Sawyer is you got a guy that, yes, he was in Portland and he was in Georgia, but at least from my perspective, he never quite gained the success that his brother did.
True.
You know, Buzz Sawyer, Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. I mean, he seemed to have that edge a little bit, but certainly when you look at a guy like Brett Sawyer, this was the bread and butter of pro wrestling when you had a guy like him on your card, because you could place him anywhere from the opener up to under the main event. And seriously, guys, a match was better because he was in it. And those guys in wrestling are the ones that don't always get the credit. You know, you hear the main eventers get all the noise about them, but some of these under guys, they worked so hard, and some of them were very, very good. And a lot of times they were good at putting other people over. I mean, even though some of the people they put over were probably the ones making, you know, the fans to come there. But I think that's the way I saw Brett Sawyer. He never quite reached the top, but certainly he added to any card that he was on.
Any words on Brett Sawyer, Mr. Drake?
Yeah, I happen to think that Brett Sawyer suffered a lot like George Hines suffered, where they were overshadowed by their older brothers. Brett Sawyer was solid in the ring. He was a good hand. And from what I recall, he was also an outstanding amateur wrestler. So he knew how to handle himself in the ring, and he was always good and fun to watch. I recently saw one of his matches against Ric Flair, a title match he had from 1982.
Yeah.
And, you know, that wasn't Ric Flair was Ric Flair, but he wasn't the Ric Flair he'd become, you know, just a year or two later. And those two just had a barn burner of a match. And, you know, another thing about Brett Sawyer that you hear a lot, we all have heard the Buzz Sawyer stories about, let's face it, he was just not a very good human being, right?
Yeah.
Brett Sawyer, on the other hand, you never hear anybody say a bad word about him. And he's always been talked about as just a classy guy and a nice guy to have in the locker room.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you from talking to him over the phone and trying to help him out, he definitely was gracious and seemed really nice to me. I'm still shocked and sad that I can't have him on this show either, but you know, our show will go on, and that's great. Our next
Rest in peace to Brett, though. Yeah, rest in peace to Brett. Sorry, didn't know that.
Talking some territory days, we got one right here.
Stand by, St. Louis, for action. You've got a ringside seat for the action and excitement of professional wrestling. This is KNL TV All-Star Wrestling. Hi again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of All-Star Wrestling. This hour on All-Star Wrestling, a familiar face who returns to the Central States area. We are talking about Mark Youngblood, formerly Mark Romero, teaming up with his brother, Jay Youngblood. Plus, we'll be seeing a situation that continues to evolve around the Central States. As a matter of fact, Kevin, all over the country. The situation that exists between King Kong Brody and Kamala the Ugandan Giant. We'll be seeing a... Kamala doesn't even know he's there!
Speaking of which, there we go. Two giants in the squared circle.
Yeah, couple of savages to say the least.
And then we see two great legends going at it.
Is that Harley Race he just dumped out of the ring there?
Yeah. We're going to see somebody else throw Harley out right here, too, and Ted DiBiase.
Nice. That was the $10 man back then.
There was NWA president, and then kind of with the St. Louis, Kansas City area, Mr. Bob Geigel. And we're looking at a young Tommy Rogers and Marty Jannetty there. So, guys, territory, Central States wrestling there. For Mr. Drake that may not know, I have an endless DVD library in my collection. I've been a fan since 1980. I was 5 years old. The videos we have here, I do not trade. I do not sell. We have them only for our viewing audience here that we love. And your thoughts on Central States?
Central States has its place in history. Long-standing territory. Look at all the great names that came out of Central States. It's a shame how it got crushed by the McMahon empire. Now, something I've always wondered, maybe you can shine some light on this too, George. Central States was sold to Jim Crockett Jr. in like 84, right?
Right.
And then Geigel bought it back in 86 or 87.
They were
And that
going.
was when he seceded. He seceded from the NWA,
Yeah.
and then he started his new organization, and then it kind of floundered out, and that was it after that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think when Harley Race went to the WWF, which it was then, because Harley was part of the ownership of Central States. It was Bob Geigel, Pat O'Connor, and Harley Race that originally had their foot in that. And Race had basically went to the guys and said, I see the handwriting on the wall here. And this was when McMahon was, definitely running roughshod and closing down territories. They hung on as long as they could, and Race just went over. And that's when he started the King gimmick, or McMahon gave him that King wrestling thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right on the time frame. But God, the Central States, I'd run out of fingers counting the number of times that I drove to Kansas City to go to a wrestling card at the old Kemper Arena. I don't know how I can remember that, but it was a small venue in the sense that it wasn't big time like our AWA was at the time, but it was so much fun with so much talent. And a lot of fans don't realize all the talent that came in, went from there. And also a lot of them started there. You said Marty Jannetty, that's where he got it. And let's not forget, guys, Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch had their very first major push in the Kansas City territory, Central States. They were champions there in like the 1967, 66. And that's where they got started. So it was just a boundless pool of talent that came in and went out. A lot of the promoters would send guys there to get a little bit of experience. Good example is Jim Brunzell from the AWA. After he left the Vern Gagne training camp, he was here for a few months in the AWA, and Vern actually sent him to Bob Geigel. And Jim Brunzell had a year or so of experience teaming with one of their local guys, Mike George. And, so it was a great breeding ground. And all the great names that were there, the Mongolian Stomper, Archie Goldie, Bulldog Bob Brown, Bob Geigel, Dutch Savage was there, the Viking, Bob Morse, certainly Rufus R. Jones, who was extremely popular. A lot of times there were a lot of wrestlers that could be popular one place and get over so well. And then maybe in the next territory, they fizzled or just couldn't get to that upper echelon. So yeah, great territory. And you mentioned Ted DiBiase. I want to tell you a little story because I just mentioned this to somebody the other day. Ted DiBiase was his stepfather, Iron Mike DiBiase, who was a great amateur wrestler. I mean, the real deal in the ring. And in 1966, he was wrestling against Man Mountain Mike in Texas. And during the match, Iron Mike had a heart attack. They had him on the floor. Harley Race was there. And Harley ran to the ringside and was trying to resuscitate. We talk about Harley Race. This guy he's a humanitarian. I could tell you so many stories about the guy outside the ring, what a hero. And we should do that sometime. I mean, the list is long.
Absolutely, we should do that.
In this case, he tried to resuscitate Iron Mike, and it was unsuccessful. Mike passed away. It made the newspapers.
Wow.
He actually died, pretty much died in the ring. And it was Harley Race that had to go to Helen Hild, who was Ted DiBiase's wife. She was a former lady wrestler, but he had to go to her and tell her that Mike had passed. And of course, Ted was the stepson, and he told young Ted, I think Ted might have been like 10 years old or something at the time. I don't remember the exact age, that his dad had died in the ring. And a lot of people don't know that, but Harley Race said that was one of the toughest things for him to, when I talked with him one time. And I was in Kansas City when we talked about that with him.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I give a lot of credit to Ted DiBiase. You know, for those out there, when we talk about classic wrestling fans like ourselves, I go way back with Ted DiBiase since '79 when he was the North American champion before he lost it to Pat Patterson in the WWF. He was such a great wrestler to me before he came to McMahon in '87 and got the $1 million gimmick. He was still good, but to me, I liked him 79 to 87 during the territories.
He had that great run in the Mid-South where he was with Hacksaw Duggan and oh boy, there was a whole army of guys down there. Butch Reed was down there at the time, and definitely a talent. And when you think back now in time, I don't think any wrestler could have done the $1 Million Man gimmick as well as Ted pulled it off.
Oh, with the laugh and yeah, great. Absolutely.
You know, it's always kind of weird when you see people in different roles, even with actors. You see a certain actor and they're in a role that sometimes they're typecast for. But when you look at them and you say, there's no one else that could have done it, in hindsight, pulled it off the way that particular person did.
Yeah. You know, and it's tragic in a sense that his son, who was briefly in the wrestling business, is now and I don't know the full stories. I can't really get into the details and elaborate on it.
Ted's son? Ted DiBiase.
Ted DiBiase's son, yeah, Ted DiBiase Jr. is facing 30 years in prison, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know what the charges were. I don't recall, but I did see that recently. I know he's no longer with WWE, years ago, but he just never really panned out. You'd think that bloodline you would think would carry on, but he never really panned out.
I had the opportunity, speaking of Waterloo, for one of the reunions there, and this goes back a few years. Ted DiBiase Jr. was there for the wrestling card that they put on in conjunction with the Hall of Fame weekend, and he wrestled on the card, and he had $1 Million Man sit in his corner. And
cool.
And Ted Jr. was very green, but his opponent was Curt Hennig. I'm sorry, not Curt Hennig, Joe Hennig. Joe's obviously Kurt's son. And in his corner, in Joe Hennig's corner, was Larry the Axe. Because by that time, Kurt had, passed away, sadly.
Right.
But I remember that match so vividly, and for me, it was a great moment. I don't recall anything about the rest of the card because there were a lot of, I guess, lesser talented people on it, but I loved that match because of the two that were involved, DiBiase and Larry.
Was that you said Joe Hennig? Was that who became Curtis Axel in WWE? Was that the same wrestler? Okay.
Originally, Vince used him as McGillicuddy. I forget what his first name was, but he originally started with the WWE or F, whatever they were at the time.
Yeah.
Was it Michael McGillicuddy or something? He was in that role. And then later on, it became Curtis Axel, which is supposed to be a takeoff on Curt Hennig and Larry the Axe.
Yeah. Which I thought was really cool. Yeah. But both those guys, unfortunately, they didn't stick with today's wrestling, and they didn't last very long, unfortunately. I mean, not every third or second generation wrestler does, but it's unfortunate that those two guys couldn't stick.
Well, and I don't know about Ted DiBiase Jr. because we do know he is facing it's all involved taxes or something or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But with Joe, for example, Larry, before he died, Larry Hennig, he talked, you do not know what a proud grandpa he was. Oh man. And I mean, he loved Kurt so much. And he was always telling me that, well, the WWE just signed a contract with Joe, and he's on contract and he's going to travel here and go there. And Larry was telling me this, but the sad thing is, it isn't a matter of whether Joe Hennig is good or he isn't. If he isn't working for the WWE, we all know there's not a lot of places that he can go to. And right. I mean, other than AEW or a couple of these others that are, trying to compete. And that, guys, is the single greatest travesty that we no longer have all the territories that we did. Right. Because in the day of all the territories, when we had 25 or 30 of them around just the United States, If a guy got tired of his territory, if he didn't like his push in the territory, if he got stale in the territory, start something new, he go on the road, end up somewhere else, have success, make money. And that is the single greatest thing that I've really despised what McMahon did when he went national. And I understand it, and there's no reason to, go through all that again. But the fans today just don't understand that we have no place for these wrestlers to go. And if you don't have a place to go, you don't have a job, you got to go do something else.
Yeah, an interesting note on that, George. John, I don't know if you have it currently available, but this was just announced last night or today, speaking of Vince McMahon, because he's kind of like the leftover piece of the territory days, because he's the guy that kind of destroyed it, so to speak, but brought everything national and built wrestling up to what it is today, depending on your opinion of him. But, he's contributed a lot to the business. But now with this merger with UFC and Endeavor, I believe is the name of the company now, they've made a statement already that they really don't, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not going to read it word for word, but they don't want Vince McMahon part of the board, and they really kind of want him out because he's got a lot of dirty laundry hanging around him. And, at 77, 78, somebody said, or there was a report online that he was walking around with the assistance of a cane, which surprised me. Vince McMahon was built like a machine. But to see Vince McMahon now kind of ousted from the wrestling business, it's like another new era upon us, guys, where who knows where this merger is going to go and where it's going to take wrestling. But I thought it was an interesting note that Vince McMahon will not be a part of that because they don't want to deal with this bullshit, basically.
Well, I've tried to pay attention to the corporate structure of this new company.
Yeah.
So it is one company. I mean, obviously you have divisions of WWE and UFC, two different operating entities, but you have one company as TKO. Now we know that the CEO is his name escapes me at the moment. Ari, can't think of his last name. He's the one that put together Endeavor that bought UFC. Is it Ari Emanuel? Is that his name? Something like that. So then they put together a board of directors, and they named Vince McMahon as the chairman of the board of directors. So from what I understand, that was part of his deal of joining the new company. And it is a publicly traded company. If we did some research, we could find out who owns how much stock. But here's always the kicker with these companies, and which was the kicker with the WWE itself when they were, a public entity of their own. However, the McMahons still owed the majority ownership. They issue this private stock business, right? Or preferred stock that they call it. There's no way that Vince McMahon was going to give up the WWE as total sole control over it without having some kind of strong controlling interest in the new company. So I'm shocked that they would even put it. I mean, I think all of us said, with all the allegations and everything we've heard about McMahon, and now they have him as, up front as the chairman of the board of the new company, it's pretty obvious that that's not a good call for a new company. We're looking for public investment, right? But you have, does anybody think McMahon's going to go away quietly? I mean, unless they hit him with some new charge or something, and I'm surprised they ever even put out a statement like that, or who put out the statement. But McMahon is such a control freak that I doubt he went into this without retaining some kind of leverage or power, because the guy wants to work till he's dead. It's obvious that's the case. So I don't know. The way business and corporations go and everything else, I just have a hard time believing that he still doesn't have, a hand on the pulse here and some kind of control.
He was still doing rewrites to the shows up until recently for Raw and SmackDown. And Ariel Emanuel is the name you're looking for there,
That's
Brad.
Yes.
TKO's CEO. But yeah, very interesting stuff there. Yeah.
The thing I think you want to keep in mind when you're talking about these hierarchies like this, I think we'd be safe to say that the personality and the, as you called him, a control freak, Brad, McMahon's not going to go away. And the other side of it is, you showed those allegations or whatever he's got going against him. I think we have to all admit that McMahon has dodged many bullets.
Yes.
In the last 40 years. It's hard to believe that this coming year, it's going to be 40 years since, Hulkamania on the WWF side started, and the expansion and all the territories were getting shot at and taken down. But how many times has McMahon, survived sexual allegations, not only with him, but with his employees back at the time? There were
steroid investigations.
oh my gosh, the steroid thing. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody was predicting that was going to be the demise. And, now he's got these personal things going on. The key thing is with Vince McMahon, I guess more with the news today. I just think the people in power like that, there's so much news out there. None of us really know which headline from whatever source contains all or any of the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it be this, this wrestling business or politics or anything, it's so clouded today that McMahon's going to be around until we get the news that he passed away. And I don't wish that on the man. I mean,
Oh no.
I
Right.
don't have any ill feeling to, wish him ill health or anything, but he's sure been a pain in the butt sometimes.
Yeah. Well, guys, do you want to take a quick commercial break and finish the show, or what do you want to do?
I thought we were skipping that, right, John? We're gonna skip commercials
We
this
can
week.
go on if you guys want.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all right. We'll give them some props next week.
Okay. Well, then let's go with our next clip, John, please.
Champion Tully Blanchard. I don't really like the new Southwest champion.
Speaking of territories, here's another one. We're highlighting the announcers from Southwest Championship Wrestling out of San Antonio, Texas.
Real on top of
And look at that, father and son right there.
On my right is a man himself, the one and only Wahoo McDaniel. I'm still standing here. I've still got this belt around my waist. And I'm
Look at that belt, though. Just one plate on it. How odd.
on Heavyweight Championship Wrestling.
That was kind of weird looking. Yeah.
Yeah, they had some weird belts back there.
Again, Southwest Heavyweight Champion versus Tom Jones from Savannah, Georgia. The man
This announcer here is Gene Goodson.
Ron Goliath, the Great Goliath versus Ray Zanate. But right now, we've got a man back with us from a triumphal tour of Japan, and I want him to tell you all about it. Wahoo McDaniel.
Wahoo again.
From the Southwest Championship Wrestling, we've got a great lineup for you today. The dynamic
And their last announcer, Mr. Steve Stack.
Speaking of belt, look at that one.
Yeah, look at those tag belts. They were huge. You can get hit in the head with that for sure.
Yeah.
The dynamic duo here.
Just the ground that you are standing on, just to be on the screen with the dynamic duo.
Championship Wrestling. Here with me, the World Heavyweight Champion, Nick Bockwinkel. We'll be talking to Nick in just a moment. Let me give you a quick preview of what you can expect in this exciting hour today. The big one, the undisputed World Heavyweight.
So, guys, as we've been doing the last couple of weeks, Mr. Drake and George knows we've been paying a little tribute to announcers from all the territories. And this week was Southwest Championship Wrestling, like I said, out of San Antonio, Texas. We first saw the owner, Mr. Joe Blanchard there, father of Tully. And then Mr. Gene Goodson took over the announcing duties until their last announcer there was Mr. Steve Stack. So comments about those announcers, guys?
Well, I'd throw the kudos out to Steve Stack. I really liked his style back in the day, but the one that caught my eye was Joe Blanchard. Joe Blanchard always intrigued me because he got his biggest pushes in the business when he was a wrestler in Texas, which is where he was from. But Vern Gagne used to bring him into the AWA, and ironically, he never wrestled here. He'd come in and he'd always be a troubleshooting referee. And Vern would bring him in on when he's planning to do one of his annual hunting trips or something. And he'd bring in, all of a sudden on the card, we'd have Joe as the referee. We'd have Wilbur Snyder on the card, and maybe a couple of other guys that would come in. And then Vern would, take a hunting or fishing trip with them. But they were all good buddies. And for some people that don't know, Joe Blanchard actually became, at the very, very end of the AWA's run, he became the figurehead president of the AWA. He and Vern were longtime friends. Joe also had some good success in his career back in the Indianapolis territory before the Bruiser took it over, when Doyle and Barnett were still in charge of it. He was a great wrestler. And I loved seeing, for those that noticed, Tully Blanchard and Gino Hernandez together.
What a tag team.
Gino Hernandez, I had a chance to see them live down there. And being a lover of tag teams, those guys just rocked. I mean, you talk about heat magnets, and yet, you know, they were the ladies' idols in their own way. And that was Tully before he became part of the Four Horsemen and all that later on. But Tully definitely, the apple didn't fall from the tree as far as wrestling talent goes, because Joe Blanchard was a good one. So that's my observations.
Mr. Drake?
I've always liked Steve Stack's work. Anybody that makes that sports presentation, I mean, Steve Stack's the type that you could be watching a pro football game with the way he treated pro wrestling. He treated it with the same way. And I've always appreciated that with announcers and commentators over the years. I don't think Southwest gets enough attention. I think it should get more attention than it does, because there was a lot of interesting things that happened there, especially, you know, from like 83 to 86 down in Southwest. You know, Joe Blanchard made a go of it on his own. A lot of people don't know he had the original USA slot on cable. So he had a national organization on USA when USA was just starting out. A lot of people don't realize that Joe Blanchard took a lot of risks, and unfortunately for him, most didn't pay off, but some did as a promoter. I recently read Gary Hart's book in the spring and into the early summer, and he did not care for Joe Blanchard whatsoever and kind of tore apart what Southwest did. You know, they broke away from the Dallas booking office. There was a lot of bad blood there, but Joe Blanchard and Southwest have their place in history. They did some very impressive things, some innovative things, and I always enjoy watching their old shows on there. The one thing that does get a little crazy, though, is when you start watching towards the mid-'80s, when they're simul broadcasting in Spanish and English on the interviews, that gets a little hard to handle, you know. But I just don't think Southwest gets the attention. I want to see a Dark Side of the Ring on Southwest, because, you know, it needs to get some attention, because it was a cool little territory. And I believe, wasn't Wahoo McDaniel their first world heavyweight champion? Do I have that right?
Well, I was gonna interject that, you know, I think he's probably the champion at some point, but, and correct me if my old memory is wrong here, I thought Joe Blanchard was the one that had Lou Thez as the special referee in a match where Adrian Adonis became the first champion. And Lou Thez actually presented to Adrian. Now, this would have been after he'd been up here in the AWA and stuff, but he actually presented Adrian with the Lou Thez belt, as they call it. And Adrian had that first title run. My mind is blank right now who his opponent was.
I believe it was Cowboy
Chris
Bob
Adams.
Jr.
Oh, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a lot of that footage, a lot of territory footage of there. A lot of good matches there, even on the TV from the Junction there in San Antonio.
Well, I'll tell you, with, you know, and Brad, you mentioned Wahoo McDaniel. I mean, a promotion couldn't do bad with Wahoo as part of it. A guy that was so good on the microphone. He was very believable, very serious, very believable. He could definitely get a point across. And I'll tell you what, I never really got into the Indian gimmick, but you take that aside, Wahoo McDaniel, when I saw him wrestle, and I saw him here in the AWA a lot, and I saw him down in Dallas and Fort Worth when I was down there visiting often, I just think he was a hell of a wrestler that even in today's standards doesn't get the credit he deserves for the contribution he made to the business, because he was a tough son of a gun. And anybody,
He's been a world champion.
And Nick Bockwinkel said that you get in the ring with Wahoo, you better be prepared for a fun night, because he could make it rough for you. That says a lot, guys.
It's a household name too. Wow, a lot of people knew of Chief Wahoo McDaniel. You mentioned that name, and everybody, casual wrestling fans. Oh yeah, I remember him. Even if they didn't know his career in detail, that name always kind of stuck.
Well,
But yeah,
it
the Native
helped.
American thing, George, I'm with you on that. I mean, I'm either way with it, but either way, it worked for him, I guess.
Well, and I know, Brad, you talked about how great the TV show was that Joe Blanchard was putting on. And I remember vaguely seeing one clip where, and I think it was Bob Sweetan, somebody dumped a pail of manure over him right on TV.
Bobby Jaggers, yes.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh. I remember that, just the angle. And of course, I don't know if it was really manure. I mean,
looked like
who
it.
knows? Wrestling's done stranger things, but what a gimmick. And I remember seeing it. He just slopped it right over him.
When did they close the doors? 86?
I think it was like 86 or
Yeah,
87.
and he made his attempt at a national run in what, 84, late 84?
Well,
85?
I want to say it had to be 83 or 84 because that's when I saw this clip that I was telling you about, and we were getting it on our TV station up here, whatever net or whatever antenna version of the show was at that time we were getting.
Now, if I remember correctly, and George, you'd probably know best, and I just know from reading books and that, when Blanchard pulled out of the Dallas booking office, he essentially got himself barred from the NWA. And then I think Vern Gagne stuck with the NWA on that decision, right? So nobody was sending him talent anymore. Wasn't that his biggest issue? He couldn't get quality wrestlers down there anymore.
It wouldn't have been Vern that did it because Vern and Joe were too close of friends.
Okay.
They brought Bockwinkel in and said he was.
And he was using Bockwinkel, 85, 86, and that would have been with Vern's blessings.
Okay, maybe it was just Crockett and a couple others and Guido and them that backed.
Yeah, and then it was in
Fritz.
I think it was 88 or 89 when Vern had Joe up here. Well, he didn't have him up here. He'd have him on TV here and there about being the president of the AWA.
88, yeah, President Mr. Blanchard. Yep.
Yeah. So it wasn't Vern. I know they were good friends. That NWA board thing. There's always so many stories that go with that because there were promoters that came and went. They'd have their annual meetings. But even Vince McMahon Sr., even though he pulled out of the NWA, he remained a member of the NWA board, which, controlled the champion. And that's really what the board of the board was. It was deciding every year at their annual convention whether they were going to stay with the champion they had or come up with another one for a couple years. And each promoter, would throw in their 2 cents on who they felt would be a good guy to have the run. And Vern and Wally Carbo, they remained members of the NWA board right up to the end. And, Wally, we should point out, he was at the original board meeting in 1949 when the NWA was founded. Wow. So they remain paid members.
Wow. Well, guys, that's a great segue, Mr. Drake and George, because this is our last clip coming up is from Texas.
From the Will Rogers Complex in Fort Worth, here's Saturday Night Wrestling. 90 minutes of excitement with the world's greatest professional wrestlers.
This was before WCCW World Class Championship Wrestling. This was the NWA Texas Wrestling, 1979, from the Roy Rogers Coliseum in Fort Worth, Texas. Bruiser Brody, man, he was everywhere.
I say there's no mistaking Bruiser Brody, man. Absolutely.
Yeah. Here we see Tor Kamada against Tiger Conway Jr. I mean, they had talent all over all these territories. That was, that was great. Here we see Mark Lewin against Sweet Brown Sugar. Here's people that George knows. Reggie Parks and, of course, Frank Dusek. And of course, yes, the Von Erich family, what without Texas would be.
Right. Yeah.
Two mask guys. There's the spoiler against, I don't know who the other mask guy was here at the time, but. So, guys, our last clip was a segue we were talking about that was before World Class Championship Wrestling. It was NWA based, Texas, 1979, from the Roy Rogers Coliseum there in Fort Worth.
I think if I'm not incorrect, I think the Roy Rogers Coliseum was actually like a big movie theater, and
cool.
they had the wrestling ring on the stage of where the screen would have been, and then the crowd. If I'm incorrect, they definitely did that in Fort Worth. If that's not the place I'm thinking of,
you're right, George. It was in the mid 80s, though. I think like 83 to 85. I saw that, but this was the Coliseum that they used both.
Okay. Well, let's just put it this way. You want to talk about territory days? You can go back into the 50s all the way through to the end of the line in the 80s. If you were in Texas, you had no problem finding wrestling, whether you're in Dallas-Fort Worth, which was originally run by Ed McElmore, and then Fritz later came in 1966 and bought the territory from him. And you go down to Houston, where you had Morris Siegel, who ended up selling out to Paul Bosch. And, then you talk about Lubbock with Nick Roberts as the promoter. And Nick Roberts was an old wrestler himself. His daughter, Nicola Roberts, you remember her as a valet. And also I think she used other names too. Baby doll. Yep. But she was big. And then he also had Sam Houston was Nick Roberts' son. So the bottom line, guys, if you were in Texas, you didn't have a hard time. Amarillo, oh my gosh.
Yes.
The Funk family. You talk about the talent. Texas in itself, if I look back at all my programs and territory stuff, I go, what a place to be. If you wanted to get in your car and put on some miles, obviously there's some distance because it's a huge state.
Yeah.
But you could go to Fort Worth on Monday. You could go to Dallas on Tuesday, hop in the car and get to Corpus Christi and, oh my God, San Antonio, where Joe Blanchard was.
Yes. And
you could go down to Lubbock and Amarillo, and just a tremendous territory. The guy in the yellow mask, it was too blurry for me to tell, but I was wondering if that wasn't one of those versions of the Dirty Yellow Dog or whatever they were doing. I don't know. But that was Don Jardine, the spoiler on his opponent.
Yes, you are correct there. The other mask guy, like I said, I did not know.
I couldn't pick him out. I don't think it was, and you said Sweet Brown Sugar. We know that was Skip Young.
That was the other clip, yes.
Yeah. It was fun to see Torquemada. I got to see him as Dr. Moto when he was up here in the AWA. And he was a nut. He was a nut. Mark Lewin, what a great career he had, as just a darling baby face back in the late 50s. He wrestled early in his career as, what the heck was it? Skippy. Oh, good Lord, I should know this. It was Skippy something. And then he became Mark Lewin. But he had he and his brothers, Don Lewin. Great wrestler with Don Curtis. Talk about a tag team in the very early 60s. They were on the covers of the New York magazines all the time, or in the stories, Mark Lewin and Don Curtis. And then he pulled off that Maniac gimmick and Purple Haze. And, the fun part about these territories and these wrestlers is that if you just go through all of them, you say, man, they were all able to reinvent themselves at different times and in new territories, and we had new wrestlers.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so much fun.
It was one of the Tales from the Territories documentaries where they were talking about Texas and the Von Erichs. and how, the way the territories in Georgia, of course, about this, Brad, Chris, the territory days were so cool about it was the way they described the Von Erichs in Texas were when somebody new came to that territory, the Von Erichs were the measuring sticks. Like, so you couldn't just come in there and run amok. You had to face the Von Erichs, and you had to pay your price coming in there. I believe it was the Midnight Express, if I have that correct. It kind of came in and invaded that territory.
Well, first Freebirds, yes.
Well, you got the Freebirds you got to throw in there because
Freebirds, yeah, that's what I was thinking of, the Freebirds. And they were kind of like the Von Erichs were defending their territory from them, and I thought that aspect of it was so cool.
And the other thing about we're talking a little bit here about names and different territories, but you use the Freebirds. Promoters were so unique in that they would bring somebody in and they'd have him under a name. And then, 2 or 3 years or 5 years later, the guy shows up again under a different persona, a different name, no reference at all to the former identity.
Right, yeah.
And you look at Buddy Roberts, there's an example. How many people remember that in Dallas and Fort Worth and Houston, he was there for a while as Dale Valentine, and he was being managed by Johnny Valentine, who was on with his cane and stuff at the time because Johnny's career sadly ended with that plane crash.
I have that footage.
He was Johnny's brother, Dale, younger brother. Well, then Dale disappeared, and nobody ever. When he comes back as Buddy Roberts, and I swear nobody knew it. That's the stuff that's just magic to me.
Absolutely.
Either the fan base changed enough where they no longer had to worry that he'd be recognized, or fans just had short memories and didn't remember that they ate breakfast this morning.
And you couldn't even call it out back then. I mean, as a WWF fan growing up, you'd see a guy reappear. I'm drawing a blank on an example, but you see a guy reappear. It's like, wait a minute, like Crush, for example. Crush had he was Demolition Crush. Before that, he was like Hawaii Crush, and they completely ignored that part of his career once he became part of Demolition. Like, wait a minute. That's Crush. That was the Hawaiian Crush.
The best thing about that is look at in WWF when they had the Masked Superstar in there as early or as late as 1970 or 1983, 84. Masked Superstar was there, and then just a couple years later, Masked Superstar's back without the mask as Demolition.
Yes.
I mean, before that, he was one of the Machines.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Super Machine.
Yes.
That was a goofy gimmick.
But we were talking about Barry Darsow. I mean, so many personas: the Russian, Khrushchev, the Repo Man, Blacktop Bully, Smash. But go ahead, Mr. Drake. Your thoughts on that classic footage first.
I'm a huge fan of Texas wrestling, and I mean all of it. I'm a huge fan of Houston. I'm a huge fan of Southwest. I'm a huge fan of World Class. I like it all. And I like catching clips like you had of the old big time wrestling stuff from the 60s and 70s. What I like most about Texas wrestling is that it looks like a fight. In most cases, these guys are nailing one another. Yeah. And it reminds me a lot of the hard-hitting style in Japan, which I think is one of the reasons why the Von Erichs were so popular when they would go to Japan, because they hit. They were coming after you. Now, don't get me wrong. You watched World Class from the 70s and 80s. There's comedy stuff here and there. There's some goofy stuff, especially when Tony Falk got involved later on and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but I always enjoyed the athleticism of Texas wrestling and World Class and the fact that it looked like a fight. It's popular nowadays for people to like mock and knock the Von Erichs. And I don't know why. That's become a thing like over the last 15 years is to make fun of the Von Erichs because they got drug problems and stuff like that. Those guys were athletes. Every one of them were mega athletes. And they were tremendous in the ring. I've heard people knock Kerry Von Erich in the ring. Have any of you ever seen a bad Kerry Von Erich match? No. I can't think of a single one I've ever seen. And the match where he wrestled Flair, you can catch it online from 1986, where he was apparently as high as a kite. The guy looked great in the match. His match with Lawler, where he was also high as a kite at Super Clash when he cut his bicep, he looked terrific in that bout. And at that match, he only had half a foot. I don't. It irritates me that people disrespect the Von Erichs because They were all tremendous athletes, and they all were gifted in their own ways too. You had Kerry. I've seen a lot of David. I haven't seen enough of David as I have with Kerry or Kevin, but Kerry seemed to me to be the most versatile. David seemed like, that guy was built for Japan. He was
should have
built
been
for
heavyweight
Japan.
champion, in my opinion.
That guy was like the old man, but bigger. He was mean. Yeah. He was a vicious heel when he was doing work in St. Louis. And
in Florida.
In Florida, yes. And Kevin was magnificent too. He was another tremendous athlete.
And
so,
real quick, Mr. Drake, you bring up, let's talk about that. And Charlie mentioned second and third generation. Third generation with the Von Erichs or Atkinson, if you want to be correct. Kevin's two sons are great.
Marshall and Russ. Yes, I enjoyed seeing them in
what a great tag team.
Yes, I enjoyed seeing them in MLW.
Mm-hmm.
They're out of MLW now, correct? And I haven't seen them resurface anywhere. Marshall's another one. He looks like a Greek god, and Ross is probably about 4 inches smaller. I believe Ross is the older brother. They're both tremendous. I don't get why they haven't clicked anywhere yet. You know what I mean? I don't think like New Japan or somebody would want to snatch them up for the lineage and the fact that they can go. Maybe they don't want it. Maybe they're happy in Hawaii. Anything's possible. They got to be. Ross has got to be pushing mid-30s now, right? And Marshall's probably early 30s, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and man, I'd love to get their dad on one of these shows. Kevin Von Erich is just enjoying life in Hawaii.
Yeah. I always enjoyed Texas wrestling, and you're talking Chris Adams there in the early 80s was fantastic.
Yes.
Gino Hernandez was tremendous. What they were doing with the Fantastics was all-time great stuff. World Class is another one. Now, I realize, the Von Erichs get a lot of attention because of the tragedy, and it shouldn't be just because of the tragedy, because they were doing some very impressive numbers at Texas Stadium and everywhere else all those years. Fritz knew what he was doing. Fritz was good. Fritz always had smart people around him. He had Gary Hart with them all those years. A lot of people say maybe he wasn't so good when, the name of the guy is escaping me right now. Johnny Mantell. People say that the downfall was when Johnny Mantell took over. I don't know. I thought it was still good television with the Freebirds and all that. But yeah, they were tremendous territory, and they rightly have their place in history.
Definitely. Well, Charlie, why don't we see our jobber of the week?
Yeah, let's roll along here, boys. We want to pay our respect and make a little bit of fun of our jobber of the week this week as we pull him up here. Our jobber of the week it's actually Bill Wood, and then he was introduced as Bill Woods on WWF programming. So I was looking into him. He is from Palo Alto, California. Acquired a 0-16 record over a 5-year span. That was from 1987 to 1992. The thing I find interesting, because you try to figure out like where these guys get work. Again, he had 16 matches over 5 years, and he wrestled in places like Kentucky, Massachusetts, Florida, back out west in California. So you wonder sometimes too, if these guys are just showing up to work and do the job. They got to be making some kind of money to be able to travel like that, because I don't think Vince was paying for a jobber to fly out to California or wherever. Yeah. So very interesting stuff. But yeah, Bill Wood, and here he is getting taken to task here by the Big Boss Man, this was one of the Big Boss Man's first matches on Wrestling Challenges, was back in '87 with the Doctor of Style Slick there, where he was beating him up in the corner. He had already handcuffed him to the middle rope, and what I love about going back to these matches, because I'll look up a jobber and then I'll go through the list of matches and I'll try to YouTube, if I can find anything on these guys. And I found this match, and Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan were on commentary. Of course, we talk about Bobby Heenan. Gorilla, of course, we love as well. But Bobby Heenan, again, Big Boss Man making his debut. He's dressed as a cop. Heenan, middle of the match, said, that's not the type of guy you're going to bribe with a pack of cigarettes. So Bill Woods better be on it tonight. And, of course, he got his ass kicked, so cigarettes being the currency in jail, of course. But Bill Woods was taken to task there by the Big Boss Man and his manager, Slick. So that is our jobber of the week from Palo Alto, California, Mr. Bill Wood.
Wow. Well, guys, before we let you go, why don't we give our viewers out there across all our platforms a quick last plug for the WFIA?
Before we do that, I do want to say something.
Yes, sir.
I'm always eager to admit when I'm wrong, and I was wrong, and I knew when I said it. I was wrong. I had stated that Sam Houston and Baby Doll were Nick Roberts' kids. Baby Doll was, but Sam Houston was Grizzly Smith's son, brother to what's
Jake.
his name?
Jake
the Snake. And as I said it, I knew it. And thank you, Brad, for kicking me. I got a little prompt here. But, guys, this is why erasers are on pencils, right?
That's right.
I was wrong. I knew it. If you noticed when I said it, I was but it was Grizzly Smith. So
that's an automatic 3-week suspension, George.
I just proved it. I'm not perfect.
Hey, we're only human. That's right.
All right. Tell us about the WFIA.
Yep.
All right. The WFIA is back in action, live in living color, as superstar Billy Graham would say. The WFIA.org. It's 100% free to join, and you will get a free digital subscription to Wrestling Fan News and so much more. Check it out today, everybody. The WFIA.org.
And I challenge anyone listening, watching, if you can beat the cost of free, then you're better than I am. It's free. It's in today's world, it doesn't get cheaper. So, and you're going to be surprised when you go to the site, when you get the bulletin, the nice magazine. It's online, but you're going to love it. It is done, and Brad just deserves a ton of credit for all the hard work he's doing. And we want to get towards that convention a year from now. So
that's right.
Thank you guys for letting us plug it.
Absolutely, guys. Awesome stuff. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, for something like this, to have this revived, Brad, we think it's a great thing that you're doing. And, on this show, George is the perfect guest to talk classic wrestling with us when he's able to join us. So that whole classic wrestling aspect, that old school logo of the WFIA, it's awesome. So I hope that logo stays. But of course, that's just my opinion, but I just think it's great. It's like that classic territorial kind of old school look to it, if you will. But very, very cool to be revitalizing that.
I'm telling you, when you read Wrestling Fan News, you're going to think you're back in the 70s and 80s again. And that's our whole goal, is to capture that nostalgia with the old, with the new.
Awesome.
There it is, George. Yeah, awesome.
100% support here, and we'll mention it each and every week here, and we'd love to have you back.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen. I had a blast. Anytime you want to talk wrestling, you just give me a call.
Yeah,
absolutely, Brad. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Brad. Hey, guys. Fun time.
Yeah.
Good stuff as always, George. We appreciate the knowledge and the stories, and of course, we got to give you a little ball break in to start it out. So you're like one of us now. So you're gonna be subject to some hassle in here.
Hey,
some harassment.
My family will tell you nobody takes the hassle more than I do. I'm the brunt of many chokes. If I didn't have a sense of humor, I would have probably walked off a bridge long ago.
All right, two last things here, John, if you will. We'd love to. Tongue-tied, sorry. We would love to thank our fans, each and every one of you across all our platforms. Our home is Facebook, as you know, each and every Saturday, 2 p.m. Our YouTube channel is growing. We want to get 1,000 subscribers. We're about 50-something.
We're about 950 short, but we'll get there one day.
But it is all together under the search. When you go on YouTube, Friends with the Z Media Network, you can watch not only just our show here, Falls Count Anywhere, but you can check out John's sports shows and his political show on Monday nights. It's great. Also on Twitter, or X, if we will. It will always be Twitter to me, I guess, but X at Count Anywhere. And that's growing. I talked to a lot of great people on there. And also we're still on Spotify. But guys, I think we need to join some more, like Threads and some other ones out there too, right?
I'm thinking billboard, man. Let's get a billboard out on the highway somewhere with our 3 mugs on it, or our 4 mugs. Actually, we'll add George to it at this point. That'll attract the ratings, won't it?
Hey, what is it? Friends Media. What was the rest there again? Network?
Yes, sir.
Network?
Friends Media Network. Yep.
With a Z.
Yeah. Well, I just realized, talking with the 3 of you monkeys, that I think all of you could be my kids, so you better be good
Right.
because I think I'm the oldest one here.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I'll be sure to behave.
I just had a birthday last Saturday or last Sunday, just a couple days ago.
Oh, happy birthday to you, George. Absolutely.
Number 72, and I'm still good.
Oh, nice.
Well, there you go. You're my dad's age, so there you go.
I told you.
We love
Hey,
it.
man.
And Charlie, John, a word for our public out there.
Yeah, sure. Let's tonight talk about, for real quick, mental health. 844-794-3812 is the number to call. If you're feeling depressed, you feel anxious, you feel all that stuff. You don't feel like moving on. You don't feel like doing stuff. Let's say you're just it's a depression. Give it a call. 844-794-3812. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 360 every 5 days, Christmas, any day. They'll talk to you for hours if you need them. They don't come off the phone. They'll stay with you. They're professionals. And 988 is another number I want to remind everyone of. That's a simple number, 988. If you're at the point of suicide and you're feeling like you've got nowhere else to go, and I have a personal story from someone that talked to us the other night about 988. They stayed on, they felt it. They felt like they were going to take their own life. They went to 988, and 988 stayed on the phone for 6 hours with them, anonymously, saved them, basically, 988. Then also helped them find place in our area, any area you're in, all across the country, to help you further. So 988, if you're in real distress, 988, please. 844-794-3812, that's what you would do. You know, you're feeling depression and all that, because everyone does, and give them a call.
Thanks for that, John. Appreciate it. And
Can I say something about that?
absolutely.
I think that's a public service announcement that we cannot speak loudly enough about and share about. And John, you pointed out that you had somebody, you know, I just want to say that we all know people that are depressed. And like you said, sometimes we can be depressed, and depression comes in different degrees and at different times, and people handle it differently. I personally had a friend a couple years ago, pretty much a lifelong friend, who I sadly admit we did not see the depression. And had we seen it, we would have, you know, and sometimes it's hidden. And as friends, sometimes we have to, you know, maybe we have to ask, are you okay? Or, you know, can we do some hang out together and talk or whatever? And sometimes it comes in, there's little signs that you see after the fact. I worked with a guy who every night when he went home, we'd say, well, we'll see you tomorrow, Tom. You know, the usual thing after work. See you tomorrow, Tom. And the comment, I swear to you, for 6 months was, well, maybe you will, maybe you won't. And one morning, and truth story, guys, one morning he didn't show up for work. And we called his house, and his mom said that he had went to a churchyard.
Wow.
And killed himself.
Wow.
And so be there for a friend, be there for people if you notice something, and definitely keep those numbers handy. Don't be afraid to ask out for help.
100%. And that's why we love to give that.
And always remember that there are people out there that care about you and love you. And, you know, what happens to them when you do this to them too. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
that number is important. That 988 is easy to remember. If you can't remember the mental health 7 digits or 9 digits here, you know, or 10 digits, and, you know, 988 will get you some immediate help. So yeah, George, thank you for that.
John, that's good stuff. I'm glad you promote that. It should be personal to everybody.
Absolutely. Guys, let's, as we wrap up here, just a quick preview for our next show. Had a whole bunch of WWE releases today due to the merger with UFC, which is now TKO. Man, Dolph Ziggler, one of the big names, been in the business in WWE for a long time, and
great talent.
Yeah, Shelton Benjamin, another one. Quite a few, but something we could talk about heading into next week or the next show. But George, thank you again so much, sir, for joining us on this show. Again, you're like one of us now, and
Definitely.
we always appreciate your wrestling knowledge and your stories, man. We appreciate you so much.
I'm honored. I tell you this, I'm honored that you asked me to come on. And I told Chris when we were chatting today, I feel like I'm part of the family. If you want me here, I'm excited to do it, and I'm looking forward to it. So we'll make it a foursome. That's okay.
All right.
Yeah, right.
Before we sign off, before we sign off, we have a lot of guests coming down the pipe. And also next month into October, we'll celebrate our 2-year anniversary, and we'll have something special planned for that for sure.
All right, guys, take care.
Thank you.